哦，我们这边8人，要不然我们开始吧。
然后我可以用英文来讲嘛，因为每次都是换成中文，然后就会开始
哦，
在
对，
纠结。
可以啊，就是如果说大家中间有什么问题的话，然后可以中文提问，这些都没有问题。你讲的
好，
时候你就
好，
随意来就好了。
好，OK，谢谢。I'll just begin with chapter 12, Austin's Speech Act. Okay, so first part is about the introduction. So if we look back at history, the philosophy of languages, they pretty much focus on the fundamental things about the meaning of a sentence as is, which is something relating to the truth value. Like for example, the decorative sentences. Austin in the 1950s in his book, started to challenge this view. Instead of focusing on the grammatical type like decoratives, he raised a concept of performative sentences. So the performative sentence is nothing to do with simply the truth value. It's more like the acts we may perform using these sentences. So basically, it's shifting from the it's a big shift from the concentration of the truth value, which is an analytic tradition, to a more general category involving language used in our daily lives. So let's look at the chapter one by one. So the first part, 12.2, is something to do with the performative utterances. So regarding the definition, there are specific contexts, as in the natural use in which these sentences may be produced. There are all decoratives used to perform some actions rather than to describe the world or the state of truth of value. So if we have a look at page 232, there are 5 sentences listing here. I'll just go through them one by one. The first one, so I promised that I'll be there. So the context is something that made it up. So because I don't know what happened when the person speaks this sentence, so I just imagine a context which is kind of reasonable to explain as to why the sentence has been is produced. So the context is by it can be by someone who made a promise to someone else, and the action is to make promise. I named this ship the enterprise. The context, it can be either an engineer who built this ship or the mayor who gives a speech in a public ceremony. And the action is to give something a name. The thing here is the ship. Number 3, I give notice that the next meeting will be held on the 1st of August. The context can be some authorities announce the date of the meeting, and the action is to give a notice. Number 4, I sentence a prisoner to 14 years hard labor. The context can be a judge passed the sentence. The action is to pass the sentence. Number 5, I declare the festival open. The context can be some dignitary, like for example, the mayor, in the opening festival, and the action is to declare the opening of the festival. So if I look at the verbs here that are being highlighted, so the verb in sentence 1 to 5, they're all first person. Besides, they're all in present tense. However, we can't just based on these 2 characteristics and say that these are necessarily sufficient to define the sentence to be performative. So, for example, we can say we can replace the verb with something else, like, for example, third person singular or plural, or the future tense will do. They work perfectly the same as performatives. So in this way, we change this sentence to 1A to 5A, which the first one will become I will be there. The second one become the ship is the enterprise. The third one is the next meeting will be held on the 1st of August. The fourth is the prisoner will serve 14 years hard labor. And the fifth one is the festival is now open. So we need to know that all these above mentioned verbs can be used to state the fact. Like, for example, in the diary. So what happens in the diary is when you write down something, you are actually recording something happened in the past. So you are stating the fact. However, when we compare the performative use and versus the constitutive use, so the constitutive use of the verbs are speech act to present the true or false account of the facts of these cases. Next chapter is next section is about something towards the general theory of the speech act. According to Austin, the performative utterances is something is done in the utterance of the words. The constitutive utterance is something can be true or false. And they can be further divided into two different distinctions. So, for example, the performative utterance is something is done, and the constitutive utterance is something is done, and the performative utterance is nothing is done, nothing like that. The utterances, or it can be described as the utterances of declarative sentences which are true or false, versus utterances of declarative sentence which are not true or false. So what does a performative utterance have to be like? First, the author said it must contain the verb to describe the act. For example, the verb can be promise or order. Second, the verb to be in the first person of the present tense. Sorry, let me have a look at. It's not sorry, just give me a moment. I think I just typed something wrong here. Okay, the verb to be in the first person of the present tense, however, in this condition is not necessary, as it can be in the third person or second person, and it is not sufficient as the sentence with this grammatical criteria need not to be performative. For example, in the diary, they can become the constitutive use. Therefore, Austin said, utterances of sentences which contains no performative verb are considered performative if they are equivalent in some sense to the utterances of sentence which do contain a performative, like that in sentence 1a to 5.8. For example, the first sentence, I promise that I'll be there, versus I'll be there. 1a is, we can take it as a non-performative. For example, we can use it to make a prediction. And it can be it does contain some performative sense, which is equivalent to a promise that I'll be there. We need to know that the first sentence may contain a non-performative sense like that in the diary. And we can even make it ambiguously performative by adding the self-referential divisor hereby to make a sentence like, I hereby promise that I'll be there. As per Austin, 1a, which is the sentence in the future tense, is the primary performative, which is a kind of performative utterance which could be made before there are words to describe types of linguistic act. Performative is made explicit when being reformulated with a performative verb, as promise in 1. The verb is promise, the act is to make a promise, so it's pretty much consistent. The important is, in this way, a constitutive utterance will come as performative. For example, 6a, the cat is dead. To add a performative verb state, I state that the cat is dead. The use of 6 is pretty much equivalent to the use of 6a. The act is to make a statement. So, as a consequence, we can say constitutive are performatives too. Here's the, I think it's one of his most famous statements about the speech act. So Austin divided the speech acts into 3 categories. The first one is what we call the locutionary act. It's saying something, which in other words is the literal meaning of the speech produced. The second one is the illocutionary act. It's doing something in saying that, which is speaker's intention or act carrying the literal meaning. The third one is called the perlocutionary act. This is the act achieving something by, that's what we call achieving something by means of saying something. This is the act of achieving something by, yeah, I'm just repeating myself, sorry. So for example, shut the door. The locutionary act is the is that the speaker says something meaningful rather than merely just making some noise. The illocutionary act is an order or request to the audience to shut the door. The prolocutionary act is getting someone to shut the door as the goal. The three acts are basically integrated instead of being separated. So when we say something, according to Austin, we have these three acts all together in the sentence that we deliver. Austin places a great emphasis on the illocutionary act. For example, the first sentence that we mentioned in the past, I'll be there. The illocutionary act can be either a promise without having a true or false statement, or it can be a prediction with a true or false value. So when we make a prediction, that means we'll predict if the sentence becomes true in the future, that means I'm there at the point in the future. For example, tomorrow. If the sentence is false, that means I'm absent. I didn't make it to come to that place. So if Austin is right, the specific significance in the history of the philosophy of language is that we will only have something capable of truth or falsity once the appropriate illocutionary act has been performed. Second, the general significance for understanding what matters about the language is that many of the most important features of language we encounter would depend on the illocutionary act being performed instead of the grammar. So let's look at the truths and performatives. I promise I'll be there. I'll be there. Basically, there's nothing true is said by either one or 1A. So when I make the promise, it's nothing to do with the truthfulness of this sentence. I'll be there is still the same. It's just like when I make a promise that I'll be there. So there's no truth value or false. But when we look at the sixth sentence, I state that the cat is that. And with 6A, the cat is that. One thing is stated by both 6 and 6A, that is the cat is that, which does have the truth value. For sentence 1, Beck and Harnish said that there are two illocutionary acts. First one is I'm stating that I promise to be there. The second one is I'm promising to be there as that the statement is true, which requires sentence 1 to be self-verifying. This is slightly different from what Austin said. If author want to make a promise, I don't state anything. Their suggestions to conflict with the corresponding intuition, that is, what makes a statement true must be somehow independent of that statement itself, is what they call liar paradox. An alternative to their suggestion is introducing a specific speech act as what we call referring. So uses of the singular term to involve act of referring to the object, or use of the predicates to involve acts of referring to the qualities and relation. When we talk about predicate, for example, a sentence does have a subject and a predicate. So predicate is something to do with talking about the property of the subject. Use of the sentences to involve act of referring to combination of the objects and qualities or relation. So we also need to look into the difficulties. In this case, we need to explain how sentences can refer to states of affair without being true or false. And we also need to deal with some various difficulties which have led Davidson and other abandoned referential account of meaning. So let's look at the issues of the theory of speech act. The issues to consider, well, one of the major issue, that's what they call the center is the meaning of the word. That is, when we perform an illocutionary act, we need to first explore the prior meaning of the words. However, also define words as if they only have the sense of reference instead of having the meaning. The truth and falsity can be determined only when the illocutionary act of stating is being performed. Number 3, the meaning of the word cannot explain the truth of the sentence. That is hard to see how sentence can be true. There are two natural alternatives to the theory of speech act. This first one is we can adopt some form of referential theory of meaning, including the speech act of the referring. And the second, we may try building speech act theory more broadly into the conception of semantics. That is, attempt to explain the meaning of the sentence in terms of the illocutionary act that could be performed with them, which is the illocutionary act potential. In this way, the very same sentences can be used to perform quite different illocutionary acts. We need to then first determine what particular illocutionary act could be performed. Here, there's, I think that's one of the statements that the author mentioned in the textbook. It says I am, which is a sentence as means that P, if and only if S means that P. Or if someone makes a promise in the utterance S, he will be promising that P. If someone makes a prediction in the utterance S, she will be predicting that P. So it pretty much depends on the illocutionary act that the person, which is the intention, the speaker's intention, which has been defined before he start to, before we can analyze the sentence. So what determines what illocutionary act is performed when someone speaks, which is the intentional meaning that I've been talking about this before. Whether an illocutionary act needs to conform to rules established by convention, Austin said that various kinds of illocutionary act are established by convention. However, it's not clear that what kind of convention he had in his mind. So we're just guessing. And according to Austin, speech acts are evidently bound by rules, which with clear boundaries, which is performed by the right person in the right way, on the right occasion, etc. These rules are conventional but arbitrary. Same for the promises. The practice of making promises need not have existed, and it seems to depend for its continued existence of the attitudes and behavior of the group of people who accept each other's promises. However, these do not apply to the majority of the illocutionary act. So when it comes to oppose Austin's view by Beck and Harnish, we need to, they mentioned that we need to be nothing conventional about them, and the fundamental types of illocutionary act are fixed by the states of mind which they express. It can be expressed of the belief, which is a constitutive as per Beck and Harnish's definition, or it can be expressions of directives, which is a speaker's attitude towards some prospective action by the hearer. There's no specific procedures or conventional rules to follow to perform an act. In this view, an illocutionary act is an intention to do something. That means an expression of a particular attitude like beliefs or design. So here I do list out some of the, I've just listed out 5 sentences for us to have like a little bit of idea about the illocution force or the perlocutionary effects of each of the following statement. So the first one, I'm sorry, and I have to ask, but could you please come a bit earlier? The second one, I wouldn't go around staring at people like that if I were you. The third one, I hope to see you at 9 o'clock. And the fourth one, do you know what time is it? The last one is I love chocolate cakes. 我先拿中文说吧 ，OK。就这边的话，就说给大家做一个小的练习，然后就说这边5句话，然后呢，我们之前讲过嘛，然后说 locution 的意思就是它的 literal meaning，然后 illocution force 是讲的说这个 speaker's 这个说话的人的 intention，他的 speaker's meaning。然后 perlocutionary act 的话，指的是他想达到什么样的目的。那这边说到这个 perlocutionary effect 的话，就是作为这个 hearer， 这个听到这句话的人，他根据分析这个 speaker 的 elocutionary force， 他会有什么样的 response。然后大家可以想要讨论一下嘛，这里。
是讨论这个 ABCDE 的他们的区别嘛？就是两种不同的。
就是这3种不同的 force 的区别。就比如说，I'm sorry to have to ask, but could you please come a bit earlier？ 这个句话的话，如果我们只是看它的 literal meaning 的话，那可能就是一个 request，因为他说 could you please come a bit earlier， 所以它是一个要求这个 hearer 去做一些事情。但是如果说我们看到它的 elocutionary force，然后除此之外还有就是 I'm sorry to have to ask， 就是这个更像是一个 apology， 就是像这个 speaker 他是 make apology， 然后又给了一个 request。但是如果说我们考虑一下这句话的一个情景的话，可以想到说，可能他会变成他实际上尽管这个 speaker 他非常的礼貌，他说 I'm sorry， 他先道歉了，然后再说用了一些就是这个 hedging， 用了一些礼貌的用词，然后呢要求对方来早一点，但实际上他可能是一个 complaint， 他其实是在 complaint 这个人来晚了。就假设嘛，比如说他们是准备要去2个人要一起出差，然后去开会，然后呢另外一个人最后一分钟才到达那个现场，然后他们就没有时间去准备，所以 speaker 他就对这个 hearer 有一些的不满，所以他就在 make a complaint。所以如果我们假设这样一个情况的话，它的 perlocutionary effect 就是这个 hearer 可能会意识到他自己做错了一些事情，所以他会向这个 speaker make apology，就是他会道歉，然后呢，他可能会 make a further promise， 然后就说那我保证下次会早点来。
那么如果像比如说 stay 的话，就看起来像是一个 request， 然后它有可能是别的吗？
我这边有，哎，等一下，你可以看得到这个吗？
Which one？
这里可以看到吗？对
嗯
，C 的话这边就是所有的这些句子的话，其实你都需要想一个场景，然后才能去分析它的可能的这种 elocutionary force。然后你看到这个 locution 的话，其实就说 I hope to see you at 9 o'clock。你通过 hope 这个词可以看出来，它是一个 wish，它是 expressing a wish for of meeting the hero at 9 o'clock in the future. For example, can be tomorrow。但是呢，就是我们要考虑到这个，因为我给了一个场景嘛，Speaker is a school teacher, what here is a student。那如果是这样一个情况的话，其实并不是老师对你 make a wish，
对，
就是它其实是一个 command，就是这个 speaker 告诉这个 hearer， 我希望你这个时间来。那作为这个 hearer 的这个反应的话，它就应该是the hearer will make a promise to be on time for the meeting。
我明白这个意思。大家其他的呢？其他的看能不能？好的，就是每个句子其实都是这样的。
对，每个句子都是你可以想象一个场景，然后你想象一个场景之后，你就通过这个场景，就是首先我们看到这个句子，通过它的用词会知道它会有一个 literal meaning 嘛，然后你根据这个场景，你会发现它的 literal meaning 其实是被改变了。我们可以看一下第2个句子啊 ，I wouldn't go around staring at people like that if I were you。大家都可以开麦讨论啊。
就是它可能是一个类似于一个 complaint 那样的东西，对吧？就是如果说带入特定场景的话，
对呀，就是可以是一个 complaint，然后
包括 D 好像也是，也可以是。 如果
Do
带
you
入
know
特
what
定，
time is it？可以啊，可以啊。就比如说，假设就比如说
迟到了，
你来晚了，迟晚了，
对对对，
就是 Do you know what time is it？然后这就是一个 complaint，它可以是一个 complaint，就是说，你现在还知道要来呀，就是大概是这个意思。
对，
然后 I love chocolate 呢，I love chocolate cake，就是它的 literal meaning，你觉得它是一个怎样的？
就好像只是一个陈述，
它就是一个 statement。
对，
然后，那我们想想，什么时候你会说 I love chocolate cakes？你要告诉别人怎么样？
比如说，我不想要那个香草味的蛋糕，我想要的是巧克力味的那个蛋糕。我在表达一个 request。
OK，
可以这
在什么样的
样想，
场景呢？
就比如说我出去那个去一个沙滩上玩，然后别人说我去买个蛋糕，你们要不要？我说我要。然后呢，那个蛋糕铺呢有卖香草味的蛋糕和巧克力的蛋糕，然后他说有这两种，那我说 I love chocolate cake，那实际上就表达是我想要的是巧克力那个蛋糕，而不是那个香草味的蛋糕。
对，或者你还可以说 I hate vanilla cake，对吧？就怎样说都可以。然后这边的话就说，包括 Do you know what time is it？如果你看到它的 literal meaning 的话，它其实是一个 question，它就只是单纯的问一个问题。但是呢，如果说你想要，这边我是给了一个非常有意思的场景，可以看一下。Do you know what time is it？然后它是一个 locution 是一个 question，speaker was asking here if he or she knows the time。然后呢，但是我们假设啊，这 speaker hearer are neighbors and they're meeting outside the supermarket and they're having like a chat. The hearer could not stop complaining about the supervisor at work, so keep complaining about the work, something another person. 然后呢，你这个 speaker 就会说这句话之前，他会觉得，他可能因为可能你说个2-3分钟没问题，但是你一直在说，说了10几分钟、20分钟，讲了1个小时，那他可能觉得不耐烦了。所以呢，这边的话 ，Do you know what time is it？你可以把它当成一个 request。The speaker was requesting to end the conversation。就是同理，假如说有一些人来你家做客，然后呢，或者说你去别人家做客，然后呢就说你想你就说你说Do you know what time is it？然后呢，你其实就是暗示那个主人时间很晚了，我可能要走了，或者主人是对这个客人在暗示时间很晚了，你们该走了。所以这个可以把它当做一个 request 来对待。所以它的 prelocutionary effect 的话，这 hearer 就可以跑过来就是我们会这个 speaker 会 expect the hearer telling time and saying goodbye to the speaker， 对吧？就是看起来表示说，哎呀，怎么都已经这个时间了啊？那好，我们下次再聊。
是的，了解。
然后这边的话 ，B 我是给了一个很好玩的场景，也是 speaker hearer were at the drag queen party。drag queen party 就是那个就是女装大佬的聚会。
啊，好，
对，然后呢，然后 the hero had never attended a party like that before。然后结果就是这个人就一直在盯着别人看，然后呢，这 speaker 觉得非常的奇怪，就是非常的不适应，因为是他把这个人带过来的，然后是他的朋友，就跟大家介绍完之后，然后结果这个人一直在盯着别人看，所以说呢，他的这个 locution 是一个 supposition。The speaker was stating that he or she would what the person would do if he or she were the hearer， 这是一个我们叫这个虚拟语态嘛。然后呢，它的 elocutionary force 是一个 suggestion， 就是说他其实在建议这个 hearer 不要这么做了。然后呢，他会 expect the hearer 听懂了这个东西，然后会说他就停止他这个不太礼貌的这个举动。然后包括最后 I love chocolate cake 的话，也可以说就比如说像东林说那个，我这边是给了一个家庭场景，就是妈妈在问女儿她生日想要什么样的蛋糕，然后女儿就说I love chocolate cakes， 也就是说她希望她母亲去做一个或者是买一个 chocolate cake for her birthday party。所以她的 expect 的结果就是 hearer 会这个也是他母亲会做一个或者是买一个 chocolate cake for the speaker。
OK。
然后这个我也发到群里吧，这个。
好的，好的。
对，这边就是讲到，就是说，就是 Austin 他这边的话呢，他更多的着重点是在这个 elocutionary force，也就是 speaker's intention，也就是讲到他这边就是做了一个对比，就是说，他的 literal meaning 和他的这个 intention 可能是不一样的。所以说你想就在交流，如果你要假设两个人要交流的比较顺畅的话，你作为一个 hearer，你要在某种程度上可以推测到这个 speaker 他真正想表达的意思是什么。
OK，了解。行，那要不然我们后面继续。
好，然后我先喝口水。
啊，好了好了。
OK，然后下一章是 Grimes of Meaning，然后这边的话有说一下，就是 Grimes 的那个Grimes 的meaning 的话，我看了一下他就是书上讲的那个内容，我觉得好像是 Grimes 比较早期的一些想法。然后这边的话，我就加了一个东西，它是 Grimes 后面有提在他的书里面有提到的 four maxims，然后这 four maxims 的话也可以跟就是 Austin 的那3个 meaning 可以做一个对比，就是说因为 Austin 的话，他只是说给了一个 general idea about what is the literal meaning, what's the speaker's intention, what is the goal of this conversation。但是呢，就说 Grimes 的话，他这边给了他4个 maxim，然后通过就是每句话其实都可以通过这4个 maxim，就说它是否符合了 quantity 的这个 maxim 啊，是否是符合了 quality， 是否quality 指的就是 truth or false， 然后是否是 relevance 的，或者是否是 clear 的 brief 的。然后我们就是如果说它违背了这些原则的话，我们就可以推断出它会有一个 elocutionary force， 就是它的 speaker's meaning 和它的 literal meaning 是不同的。大概就是这个意思。然后后面的话就说他有讲到一些 objection to Grimes' account of speaker's meaning 啊之类的。然后我这边的话，说实话我没有看得太懂，因为它里面有讲到一些东西，就是感觉都是绕来绕去的那些。然后我就大概把书里面讲的一些内容就是 summarize 一下。然后大家有什么想法的话，可以提出来。OK， 那我就开始了。Okay, Grimes on meaning. Okay, so the first chapter is about the introduction. Quines and Davidson's, based on Quines and Davidson's radical interpretations and translation. I think that was in chapter 11. So the basic idea is what's meant by one language can be captured in another language. And based on Austin's speech check, we can say language is a tool in getting things done because there are there are 3 forces. Do you remember? The prelocutionary force is to for the utterance, the speech to have certain goal, to reach certain goal. However, provided words are just types of marks or sounds which with no meaning in themselves, how could they have actually the actual meaning? So this will come to Grimes' focus on meaning. Grimes' ultimate aim of his strategy is to explain the notion of meaning as it applies to the linguistic expression like sentences, words, or phrases. He tries to understand the everyday notion of the meaning, which basically has much wider application to the linguistic expression. And how can he achieve that? He started with dividing the general notion of meaning into 2 categories. The first one is what we call the natural category, and the second one is in the non-natural category. These 2 let's have a look at the sentence. So the first sentence with the natural has been categorized under the natural category is those spots means that she has measles. And the non-natural one is 3 rings on the bell, meaning that the bus is full. If you look at this sentence closely, you would notice that these 2 sentences are similar in form, So for example, even though they are slightly different in length, they've got subject and predicates, and the sentence structure is pretty much the same. So that's what we call they are similar in form, but fundamentally different in sense. So the differences as per Grime is the natural meaning, that is, X means that P, implies that it is true that P. So for example, sentence number 1, those spots mean that she has measles, implies that she really does have measles. However, this does not hold for the non-natural meaning. For sentence 2, the bell might have been rung 3 times by mistake. For example, it can be this driver saying farewell to his best friends or his someone he knows, or it can be some naughty kids ring the bell. So it doesn't necessarily mean the bus is full. The non-natural meaning is the strings of words follow the means that could be put in quotation marks. That is, the rings means the bus is full. So when we put the quotation, that means it can be true, so it can be slightly not true, or it can be just, you know, something that we don't need to take responsibility when saying that, as it's not the natural meaning. For the natural meaning can be understood as the significance of a certain fact, whilst the non-natural meaning is concerned with the significance of certain object or feature of objects. So this has led to the fourth difference that Grimes mentioned, which is the statements of non-natural meanings of X means that P implies somebody means that P by X. So here is a distinction between natural and non-natural meaning, which is the basis of the intuition argument of the Grimes account of a linguistic meaning. The difference is not necessarily a distinction between the natural and non-natural. Is in fact a difference of whether or not a sentence could express teleological concepts of the meaning. So teleological is what we call teleology. 它的中文是叫目的论。That means what has a goal, a purpose, or a point. Like 2 does have the purpose, but 1 doesn't. So if we take this interpretation, we can get a sentence. Those 3 rings of bell are there in order to show that the bus is full. However, we can never say that those spots she has is in order to show that she has measles. It's very weird of saying it. But we need to keep in mind that like, for example, the 3 rings of bell is supposed to show that the bus is full can be faulty. So it can be by mistake. Hence, we can see that the use of quotation mark is natural, as it could isolate what seems to be shown from the actual facts. That is, the rings mean the bus is full as objects or features of objects having purpose or not facts. Compare with that of the number 1 to 3, 4 is slightly different. So, I mean, the number 1 to 3 means the differences that Grimes mentioned, and the 4 is the last differences he mentioned. So, the reason why we say 4 is slightly different is because it's not that the statements of non-natural meaning implies that someone means something. It is that it's actually the best explanation of how it could be true. Therefore, number 4 is not a strict implication indicating that from 2, we can say that someone, 2, here's the sentence 2, we can say that someone means that the bus is full. It's only because there's no other better explanation. Therefore, we can say if 1 to 3 express the difference between a teleological or non-teleological notion, then 4 is an application to the notion of meaning of a general claim about teleology. So Grimes create a definition here as creation condition, CC. So creation condition means no mere object can really have the purpose unless somebody has made it have that purpose. We can take a simple declarative sentences as an example. E is such a sentence. We need to figure out what has to be true for E. E means that P to be true. This is a statement of non-natural teleological meaning. So Grice here use symbol N to stand for the non-natural. Given CC, which is the creation condition, C can only be true if somebody has made E have that meaning. That is, the truth of the E depends on the fact about the speakers. Given that S is the speaker, then the cofactor of E depends on S, which is S means that P by E. Here, we have two types of meanings. The first one is what we call the expression meaning, which is quite stable and independent to the circumstance of the moment. According to Grice, that's timeless. The speaker's meaning is the second one, and it pretty much depends on the circumstance of the moment. And S only means something by expression of the particular occasions. Also, we can mean by an expression something other than what the expression itself means. So Grice, so it's similar to the concepts of the literal meaning and the conceptual meaning, the speaker's meaning. Sorry, Grice's original definition of the expression meaning in terms of speaker meaning for the cases of simple declarative sentence is SE. Which is E means that P, if and only if people, in bracket, VALC, means that P by E. The interpretation is for an expression to mean something, that is the timeless meaning, is for people habitually or conventionally to mean something by it on a particular occasion. Consider when someone means something by an expression, it can be temporally or for that person. The same kind of function as expressions in general have in language. That means the same kind of function as expression in general have in that language. If we accept the creation condition, we pretty much base. I think I just missed out something here. Let me have a look. Oh, yeah, I know what's the. So we made a definition of the basis of something is having a function will be someone deliberate action. This is as their specific communicative intention. So then, in this case, we get S1. That is, S means that P by E, if and only if S produce is, with the intention of getting the audience to believe that P. However, Grice found this unsatisfactory as this didn't really take into account the difference between telling someone something and letting them know. So when we say telling someone something, it's purely speaker's action of telling the audience something. However, to letting the audience know is allowing the audience to interpret correctly what the speakers meant. Therefore, the audience must recognize what the speakers are trying to do. Grice revised his S1 to make it S2, which is S mean that P by E, if and only if S produces E, with the intention of getting the audience A to believe that P by means of the A's recognition of that very intention. So here, I'll quickly talk about the four maxims he mentioned in his later study. So there are four types of maxims. The first one is the quantity, which is one to try to be as informative as possible, to give as much information as needed, but not too much information. For example, just imagine in the situation that when the mother tried to stop the son from going out, so the mother was saying to the son, what are you doing? Where are you going? And the son just say, out. So in this case, we can say the son is flouting the maxim of quantity, that he's not giving enough information, sufficient information to the mother. So we can therefore say the son was trying to hide something, hide his real intention of going out. And also we can probably say the son didn't want the mother to know much about the reason why he's going out. 所以这里需要我拿中文解释一下吗 ？Hello， 就是刚才我举了一个例子，就是说这边 quantity 的话，就是当这个我就假设一个场景吧，然后就说这个妈妈问这个孩子，问他儿子说你要去干什么？就他儿子要推门出去，然后呢，他儿子就回答了一个 out。然后呢，我们就会说，像这样一个情况，他妈妈问了一个完整的句子，然后这个儿子只是说了一个非常简短的话，所以，他其实从 Grimes 的 four maxims 的角度来说，他是违背了这个 quantity 的原则，所以也就是说，他在说这句话的时候，他有一个 speaker's intention， 也就是他不想让他妈妈知道他出去到底要干嘛，所以他就非常简短的说一个非常就是回答了他的妈妈的疑问。Hello， OK， 那我就讲下面一个the maximum of quality， 然后 quality 的话，这边的话，它主要的着重点就是讲这个人说的话是不是真的，他是不是给了 false information， 或者说 information that's not supported by evidence。就比如说你在问别人一个东西的时候，然后呢，假设啊，就说一个人在修房顶，然后他从梯子爬上去了，然后呢，他爬上去房顶之后，这个梯子倒了，然后呢，底下的这个人就问他说，哎，你需要我帮你把梯子放回来吗？然后呢，上面这个人就说，不需要，我现在正在欣赏这个风景。所以他其实他讲的这句话和他的真正的 intention 是不一样的，就是他其实是需要这个人把梯子扶回来，但是呢，他又说 no， 我只是在欣赏这个风景，他其实是 provide a false information。然后也就是说，我们从这个角度来分析的话，他其实会有一个 hidden intention 在这里，他其实是在 complain， 就说这种事情就对他底下的那个人在 complain 说这种事情你为什么还要问我？大家知道是什么意思吗？就是好像说反话的意思。OK， 然后接下来的话就是 maxim of relation， 然后 relation 的话就是他讲东西是否是 relevance。举个例子啊，就是说，两个朋友在家里面，就两个室友在家里面讨论到另外一个人，然后就说，哎，你知道他去哪了吗？然后呢，A 是这么问的，然后 B 就说。你看到那个黄色的车了吗？他在那停了，他在我们邻居家门口停了好久了。然后其实我们会发现，A 问的问题是你知道 C 去哪了吗？但是 B 回答的是他并没有直接的去回答 A 的这个问题，说 A 去哪了，C 去哪了？他是说了另外一个东西，他说他讲的东西和这个 A 问的问题所期盼的答案可能是 irrelevant 的，但是实际上呢，我们如果要真的去分析他这个对话的话，我们会发现 B 这句话是有隐含的意思在这里。那我们会想到说，他提到了一个车，然后又提到邻居家的门口，那我们就会 imply， 我们会有一个 implication， 然后 implication 呢，或者也可以叫interpretation， 然后这就是说这个车是属于 C 这个人的，然后呢。这个车在邻居家门口停了一晚上，那说明 C 这个人一直在邻居家门口，一直在邻居家，从昨天开始到今天，他都一直在邻居家，所以这就是他们的一个speaker's meaning。然后讲到the maxim of manner， 然后when 这个的话就是讲的是说manner 指的是说，就是你说的这句话是否是清晰的，而不是模糊的。就是有些时候当别人不想去，我们就按照刚才这个例子来说吧，他其实 B 回答的时候说，哎，你看到那辆黄色的车了吗？他在邻居家门口停了一晚上。他除了违背了relevance 的这个原则，然后他也其实违背了 manner 的原则，因为他并没有直接的去回答这个人的问题，他而是给了一个非常ambiguous 的一个答案。所以说，然后这边要说一下，就说这4个 maxims 的话，它并不是说我们说的每一句话，它只会违背其中一个 maxim，它可能在违背这个，比如举个例子啊，是像刚才这个例子，就是违背了 relevance 的 maxim 的时候，它可能也违背了 manner 的 maxim。所以说，就是我们一句话里面可能会违背很多个2个或者甚至有时候4个这样的 maxims。但是与此同时，我们也不能说它违背的 maxim 越多，它隐含的意思越多。它只是说有一些 maxim 它很自然的可以被联系在一起。OK。
这里像它违背它的 manner 这个原则的话，第4个原则，那比如说是什么情况会违背呢？
就是像刚才我说的那个车的情况，就是他B 回答 A 的问题的时候，他尽管他是讲了一个 irrelevant 的一个事情，但是他讲的这个东西也非常的 ambiguous，就是他并不是非常的可以回答这个问题。
不是就很像吗？
是会很像啊，就说这2个的话，就说这2个经常会同时一起出现。
那为什么不合并成一个呢？就是我想不到一个很清晰的，就是说，那他们2个之间的不同点在哪儿？
稍等一下啊，这么一说，我找一个之前我写过的一个东西，就是它里面是有比较，就是它有几个例子是比较严格的某一种，只是违背了某一个原则的。稍等一下啊。它是不是在这里？这里就有一个，看一下。OK，这边的话就说，像这个 mother to the teenage boy，where you going？ 然后这个儿子他说 out， 他其实也是违背了，就是他主要是违背了 quantity， 因为他提供的信息非常的少，但与此同时，他也其实违背了这个 manner， 因为他其实并不是给了一个非常 clear 的一个回答，说我出去要干什么。因为你说 Where are you going? Out 的意思就是说，除了这个房子以外，所有地方都是 out。你其实并没有给一个非常确定的一个方向，你要去哪里？就比如说，我可以说我去朋友家，我去学校，我去图书馆，这些都是一个具体的位置。但是实际上就说这句话的话，就说它并没有给出一个具体的一个 expression。但如果说你要是这样子说的话，它这个回答 out， 它并没有违背 relevance 的这个原则，因为的确嘛，就是不是在房间里面，不是在 in 的这个位置，它所有的地方都是 out。
啊，对，理解 relation 的那个原则，我明白意思了。OK， 了解。
对。然后这边还有什么问题吗？那我就继续讲哈。然后到后面让我觉得最头疼的几个部分。Okay, so there are like many objections to Grant's accounts of the meaning, regardless of the speaker's meaning or the expression meaning. So the sympathetic objection is something what they call is not that strict, not that in the very opposite position. So it's basically raised by the opponents of Grant's proposal to produce some modification to their own within a larger Grant's program. So the first one, the first objection to Grant's speaker's meaning is as an expression of the communicative intention. So the opponents just say that not all uses of language are with such communicative intention. For example, when we produce a shopping list or diary, we would just record something. We don't really have the communication intention to use this word that we've written down on a piece of paper to communicate with other people. So it's just for our own records. So the author said that Grant may respond to this as follow, and they can say he may say these uses are communicative, and he may also say that the meaning of the expression is established by communicative uses, and in this way, any non-communicative uses are simply byproducts. So the second one was raised by Strawson. He mentioned something about the definition of speaker meaning. So Strawson's version is what we call S3 here, as mean that P by an utterance of E, if and only if, number one, as intends that the utterance of E should get audience A to believe that P. Second, as intends that A should recognize the intention 1. And as intent, the third one, as intends that A's recognition of the intention 1 should be part of A's reason of believing that P. So basically, Strauss pressed further on the basis of Grant's point regarding the difference between telling and letting people know. So he believes that 2 and 3 aren't enough, so he added number 4, which is as intend that A should recognize the intention number 2. This gives it some extra intention we mentioned needs itself to be intended to be recognized. And Grant's analysis can never, but however, in this way, Grant's analysis can never be completed. That means when we have some extra intention, we need to go back to the intention itself to make assumption that this intention can be recognized. So Grant has raises 3 responses to Strawson's version. The first one, he mentioned something about mutual knowledge shared by the 2 speakers. So let's look at this first. Based on the mutual knowledge, then Schnifer is another philosophy, revised S3 to make it S4, which is as mean that P by the utterance of E, if and only if as intended that the utterance of E should bring about the state of affair M with the following feature. M is sufficient for S, the speaker, and audience A to mutually know that M obtains. Second, that S intends that the utterance of E should get A to believe that P. Number 3, that S intends that A should recognize the intention number 2, and that S intends that A's recognition of the intention 2 should be part of the A's reason for believing that P. However, based on the author, S4 is still very complex and it's not as harmless as what Schnifer claimed. So here, let's look at the second response, Grant's second response. The original proposal is somewhat implicit. That's what he said. That is, for example, the definition of genuine or true communication is quite implicit. Therefore, he offered a simple account of the speaker's meaning for the simple decorative sentences. So it's point 4. The simple account of the speaker's meaning for the decorative sentences are as by, which is as mean that P by an utterance of E, if and only if in uttering E, as is in a state which is optimal for communicating that P. So so there are 2 points. He raised it here. Generic communication is an ideal, But in daily life, while we are communicating with others, we are close enough to the ideal state for everyday purpose we have in our mind. I think this is something similar to Grimes' cooperative principle. So basically, the cooperative principle is when two people try to communicate, we need to make an assumption saying that they are actually in a cooperative state instead of, like, for example, the speaker was saying something with the intention to get the hearer know what he meant. Okay, so Grimes' third response to this is it's a review of Schiffer's book. So basically, there was another person, Harman, suggested that the difficulty only arises because Grimes were concerned to avoid appealing the reflexive or self-referential intention. But in S3, the self-referential intention has been removed. Therefore, S2 with the original statement made by Grimes is not the infinite series of S3. And he claimed that all intentions are self-referential. That is, if we intend to do something, we always intend to do it in virtue of that very intention. So that's something about the speaker's meaning. Let's look at a sympathetic objection to Grimes' account of expression meaning. So Grimes' original proposal here for all the simple decorative sentences is as mean that P and if only if people bracket velc mean that P by E. It suggested that an expression's meaning meaning something depends on there being an custom or convention to mean that by the expression. However, the sympathetic objection to this original proposal denied any custom or convention, and they believe that the expression meaning is to be explained in terms of speaker meaning. The first person raised that is Davidson. So he mentioned something about the malapropism. So malapropism is the idea of use of one word where another would have been more appropriate in some sense. This expression means that what someone can be understood to mean by it. Therefore, there's no custom or convention of the expression's meaning. We manage to work out the meaning on the basis of our prior knowledge. So according to he actually has the theory of that. That's what we call the prior theory. He rejects Grimes' timeless meaning. Some people may say that it's a standard meaning. However, he said it is still possible to distinguish between speaker's meaning and expression's meaning. That's to understand the figurative use of the language by the speaker. The figurative use is the metaphorical use that would not normally ostensibly being said by the means of those words. For example, there's an old English expression. We say to kick the bucket. That means someone die. But when we talk about the literal meaning, to kick bucket, just to use your feet to kick the bucket, that's the literal meaning. But because of for some historical reasons, there's another metaphorical use of this expression. So to kick the bucket means someone die. For the objection to the expression meaning, actually, Grimes himself raised an objection to that. So he said what an expression means may have some connection with what people mean by it on particular occasions. And the occasion can be no necessary connection with the convention. Convention may be one way of establishing what is proper, but it's not the only way to do it. So Grimes revised his original proposal, making SE start. That is, E means that P, if and only if it is proper to mean that P by E. So the next section is something about a very strict objection to Grant's account for the expression of meaning. So remind everyone again, the original proposal is SE, which means S means that P, if and only if people, means that P by E. So the first opponent to this expression meaning is Mark Plate. So he said it is possible to construct an infinity number of sentences in most languages, and a large number of them will never have been used. If the sentence haven't been used, they will never have been used with a particular meaning. That means there's no such habitual or conventional use of meaning for people to mean anything. So in this way, he amended SE to make it E means that P, and if and only if people were to use E, they would mean that P by E. It's a very long expression. So so here comes the question, why people would mean something by an unused sentences. People would mean that by the sentences is that is what the sentence means. However, when you think about the difficulties, if for is true, people would mean that by sentences is that's what the sentence means. There's no such expression meaning in terms of the speaker's meaning, because speaker's meaning depends on the expression meaning. So the author mentioned something about how we can deal with this difficulty. There's a way of accepting that what people would mean by an unused sentence is determined by what the sentence means, and still giving an account of that in terms of the speaking meaning. How can we achieve that? We can, the process is like this. We can say that the meaning of the sentence, finite stock of the sentence, is explained in terms of the speaking meaning. So, and the meaning of these sentences is, there's a typo here. It's determined by the fact that people mean something by them. As sentences have parts, once the sentence is fixed, the meaning of the parts is fixed. Once the meaning of the parts is fixed, the meaning of any sentence which can be constructed from those parts is also fixed, even though there are sentences that we never used before. But because the meaning of the parts is fixed, and we know the meaning of these parts, and when we construct a sentence with all these parts, even though at the end of the day, the sentence that we never use that in our daily life, the meaning is still fixed. Also mentioned there's another way of doing it. We can presumably take language as an abstract entity, which consists essentially of pairing symbols with interpretation of them. Even if no one uses the language, as long as it's possible for sign to have the interpretation, the language may be said to exist. Therefore, language comes with its own theory of meaning. And based on Grimes, a language, in the sense of the assignment of meaning to sign, is the actual language of the given population if the communicative intentions of the population are made sense of by supposing that that's the language they are deploying, that's the language they're using. So let's look at the second last part, which is something to do with the speaker's meaning. So John So say he used a very interesting story. So that was an American in the Second World War and speaking to the Italian, because Italian German they are from one side and American and British from the other side. So the American says something to the Italian to show that he's a German soldier. However, sorry, I'm not speaking of German, so I can't say that sentence. But the meaning, I have to say, is that the meaning of the sentence is nothing to do with stating the fact that he is a German soldier. So it's something about I think I remember there was something about flowers. So because this is the only sentence he knows. So he just speaks that sentence to tell people that he's a German soldier. However, whoever understands German wouldn't take it as a statement stating that the American is saying that he's a German soldier, because he's saying something irrelevant. So when you use a sentence, you can only mean by it something which is already means, and you cannot mean what you like it by it. That is, speaker's meaning itself turns out to depend on the expression meaning. However, if you take the meaning of a common language to be held in place by convention, you seem to be assuming that the meaning of expression in the language is dependent on what individual speakers mean by them. For the purpose of having a smoother social interaction, people tend to adopt a convention to mean the same thing as each other. So if that is true, so cannot both object the expression meaning is prior to the speaker meaning, and he can not object that taking expression meaning to be conventional. Grimes did response to this. It was followed by Schiffer. He stated that Cell's case is a genuine counterexample. However, as per Schiffer, there is no restriction on what you can mean by altering a sentence. The author just make a comment here saying, basically, Schiffer and Searle, they refer to different kinds of meaning. For Searle, he says, meanings of he actually refers to the meaning of linguistic expression, that is the meaning of sentences and words. However, for Schiffer, the meaning he referred to is the meaning of action, which is the actions of altering linguistic expression. The last one, of the Grimes. Based on the creation condition, the meaning of the linguistic expression must depend on the speaker's intention. If we reject Grimes, we need to either deny linguistic expression mere objects, or find other ways for mere objects to have the purpose. For the first one, to find another way for mere object to have the purposes, the author mentioned something about evolutionary theory. So the evolutionary theory is something to describe how object can have purposes without anybody ever having given those purposes. For example, a heart can be there in order to pump blood. If our ancestors' hearts had not pumped blood, our hearts wouldn't have existed. So that means when there is something exists, it must have some function in the past to make it exist. For linguistic meaning, if this word hadn't been used in a particular way in the past, they wouldn't now be used at all. The evolutionary theory provides us with an account for what seems to be purposive without actually introducing any purposes. And for the other statement, that is the linguistic expression are mere objects, words are not really mere objects, and that is not really just types of marks or sounds. Therefore, they are intrinsically meaningful. In this way, we can say that we don't really need to account of how they come to have meaning. So they are just the existence of these words actually have meaning. So we don't really need to give them some extra definition to make them having the meaning. OK， Hello，就是这些了。大家有什么要说的吗？Hello，
好，这边，喂，能听到吗？
喂，可以听到，可以听到。
我这边没什么问题，看看你们。大家有什么要那个的吗？哦，我可以再看一下最后哦，没事，我这边可以自己打开那个文件。对
OK，
自己打开看一下。对，刚才有一页好像过得有点快，我再看一下。
我是挺喜欢他那个 German soldier 的那个句子，就说他讲了一句德语，然后那个德语并没有真正的去告诉这个意大利人说他是个 German soldier，他只是说了一句跟这个毫无意义的话。但是呢，就说这边就讲到，就说，就是反驳的这个人嘛，他就是说，就是说你不可以随便的说一件东西，随便的说一句话，然后呢就说这就是你的 speaker's meaning，就说你的 speaker meaning 必须是基于 expression meaning 的一个基础上，你不能就说我随便讲一句话，然后就让别人去猜出来你代表的是另外一个意思。怎么说呢？就说我想到
就是他们
之前说
还是要有一种相关性。
对，它是有一些相关性，就是说你不能说把它们完全的这个分开。
但这里我在想的一个问题就在于的是，首先这种相关性，它到底是什么，我们其实不知道。因为现在其实如果我们要推断从它的一个文本的信息来推测它的语义的话，那么我们至少要考虑3个东西，一个是它文本本身的这样的一个
嗯哼，
对，本身的一个意义，以及它的一种和它的语义之间的一个相关性，还要知道它的那个上下文的情景。呃，那这3个就我就觉得这3个，当我们哪怕是知道了它的一个上下文的情景，呃，我们对它的语义也有可能没有办法做出确切的一个判断。
所以这就是为什么 Grimes，我个人觉得哈，这就是为什么就是他发现有这个问题嘛，然后所以 Grimes 在后面就出来了那个 Maxim 的这种方式来去 test，它是有什么样的这个言外之意在那里。对，然后但是 Grimes 的这个 Full Maxims 的话，它也是有很多人去批判它，然后就说它这个东西的话，首先是基于你要一定是 English speaking country 就是或者是 Western culture 才会就说因为不
当然，
同的这个文化，它可能它用的它这种表达方式会不一样，所以说你比如说这个东西 flouting 的可以在英文里面是 flouting the maxim of relevance，但是可能它在中文里面它就并没有这样子出现这种问题。然后这边的话，我就想到一个例子，就是说，像在日语里面，你要是那个日语的 expression，我不会说日语，所以但是它的意思就是说，let's think about it。它的英文的翻译就是 let's think about it。但是呢，当你说两个人在对话，然后有一个人说 let's think about it 的时候呢，那讲英文的人他就会觉得说，哦，那你是要考虑一下，就说你觉得这个东西还可以，
嗯，
就是说你没有在反对，但是在日语的这个环境下，你说 let's think about it，其实是这个人在委婉的在说这个 idea 不行。
嗯，
所以为什么说，他们就说 grants 的这个 four maxims 的话，它的局限性只是在 English speaking country，而且就算是 English speaking country，就比如说你在澳大利亚，它的一
对，
些表
它都是
达可能跟
相对的，可能跟另外一个
对
地域都不一样。
对，举个例子就说，像打招呼嘛，然后如果是你就说你问一个英国人说 How are you? How's it going? 然后他就会说 not bad。然后呢，你问一个美国人，你说 How's it going? 然后他会说 Oh great。所以他就是还会有一些，尽管是都是讲英文，但是他还会有一些文化的差异在里面。
但这种反驳好像并没有太大问题，是因为他只是说他这个方案不够的精细，他
对对
只能说他不
对，
够精细。
但是这样的话就是会引出另外一个东西，就是Brown and Levison，就是刚才有提到Davidson，就是 Davidson 这个 Davidson，然后他们 Brown and Davidson 的话，他们后来是出了一个叫做 politeness theory，然后那个 politeness theory 的话，就说他会讲到就是一个叫 face act，这个 face 的话就是我们讲到就是其实它是从中文来的，它讲的是人的脸面。然后就举个例子，就说，你要是当众批评一个人，你其实是让他丢脸了。
嗯，
所以就说你们之间可能会出现一些冲突，所以说你要为了让他不那么丢脸，你会有一些这种相关的 strategy 来去 mitigate the illocutionary force。然后，所以说这样的话，就是说他提出了一个 face theory，然后这个 face act 的话，它还有包括就是 positive face 和 negative face。然后所谓的 positive face 的话，它是指的说，就是说一个人的个人的这种 positive self，或者是这种 self confidence，或者是他希望大家喜欢他的这个意愿。然后呢，那个 negative face 的话呢，并不是说他这个是就不好。他 negative face 的话，指的是就说我不希望别人打扰我，我希望我可以做自己想做的事情。就举个例子，你要求别人帮你做一个事情的时候，其实你是impede the negative face of the person。对，也就是对，所以他就里面提到这个东西，然后他还有讲到一些，比如说是 positive politeness 和 negative politeness。就比如说你在 request 的时候，request 别人做一些事情的时候，他所谓的 positive politeness 呢，指的是就说我要，就是假设我要问你借钱，然后我对你说啊，我知道你是世界上最好的人，这就是一个 positive politeness，就是你在赞扬对方，所以让对方的 positive face 得到更充分的这种满足，所以你会提高你这个request 的成功率。然后呢，又说到一个叫做 negative politeness，然后那个东西的话指的是说，就说你在比如说你跟别人道歉的时候，然后你就说啊，我简直是太蠢了，我怎么会干这种的事情？我真的是就是所谓的 negative politeness 的话，就是说在说的过程中，然后贬低自己，抬高别人。对，所以然后
这其实就在说场景的不同会导致我们对它的真实语义的判断会不同吗？
这个的话，它就是说讲到但是有一点就是因为你要考虑到，就是说它这个更像是一个运用的范畴，而不是就是来看它是否是就是有那个隐藏的意义的范畴。就是怎么说呢？就是说，grant the maxim 的话，就比如说你要违背了某个 maxim，你会有一个隐含的意义在里面。但是呢，我们讲到这个Davidson 他们的这个 politeness theory 的话，是讲到就是说你在就举个例子，就是说，像刚才那个说 "Could you please come a bit earlier"，它是一个问题嘛。然后，但是你其实这句话的真正的意思是在 make a complaint，你是在说，就是假如说像我刚才给的那个情况，就是说，这个人来晚了，然后呢，sorry，是 what time is it，对吧？如果说这个人来晚了，然后你问他 what time is it，你是不是在 make a complaint？然后呢，但是呢，你会用一系列的这种，比如说用问题的方式，或者是让别人不太尴尬的这种方式，把这个你的这个真正的意图给弱化。就举个例子，像英文里面其实有很多的这种 就是 positive politeness 或者是 negative politeness 的一些用法，比如说你会发现那种其实这个也可以把它称作是叫做它的 register， 就是句子的 register。然后举个例子啊，就是你比如说你要跟一个非常重要的人说话，你要请求他干一些事情的时候，假设你对你的 lecturer 说，然后你就说，哎，我能不能你想做的事情就是你想晚点交这个作业，然后你在说的过程中，你可能会说一大串。I know it's been very hard for you to collect all this paper, and I can totally understand that for the school there's a deadline for all the professor to mark this paper. So I know it's a lot of work for you, but could I please possibly request for extension for the submission? 就是你会说一长串的话，然后把你的这个 request 给 mitigate， 就是你的真正的意图给弱化一些，就是让别人听起来没有那么的刺耳。
就是这个和根据它的 content， 根据它的语境的削弱有什么不一样吗？可以这么说，就是还是有不一样的，因为这个地方我们之所以要做这样的弱化，并不是因为它 context， 而是因为它的一些 purpose 是不一样的。
对，就是说，因为有些时候你在说一些话的时候，然后因为句子太长，然后呢，有些人就是，比如说你要是跟一个 second language speaker 在说一个很长的句子，他可能就会 catch 到你前面问的 could you please 那些地方，但是他会忘掉，他会 miss 掉，就说你真正的在比如说英语的表达中，你用了这些 expression， 其实意思是另外一个意思。
那这和它的长短是有关系的吗？好像
一般通常来讲，句子越长，加的 element 越多，那它就是它给出来的这种 mitigation 的这种 expression 就越多。就是这边也提到一个，就说也是 Davidson 他们 Brown and Davidson 他们的一个理论叫power distance relative imposition to weight imposition， 然后叫 PDR。然后 power 的话就是讲的说hearer 和这个 speaker 之间他们有一个 power difference。就举个例子，这个 power 可以是 status 的，比如说父母，像我们在这个中国家庭中，传统的中国家庭，那父母是对于这个孩子来说，他是会有一个更高的这种 status power。那除此之外，医生和病人之间会有一个professional 的这个 power， 就是医生是 professional， 然后病人是这个就是他在这个医学的角度上，他是没有太多的知识的，他肯定是，所以在医生给这个病人说话的时候，他可能会用一些祈使句啊，就说你不能再这样子了，你这样子会怎么样。然后在病人问这个医生话的时候，他可能就会相对的比较礼貌。然后还有比如说跟 legal 的 power 有关，警察和这个 ordinary people。那警察举个例子啊，假如你在澳洲，然后警察跟你说让你从车里面出来，然后你不出来，你就会被铐住。所以因为警察在这种程度上，他是有一个legal 的这个 power 是 over the ordinary people 的。然后还有一个就是叫做 distance， 就是我们讲 relative distance， 就是人与人之间的这个相对的关系。假设就是我举个例子吧，都是 request。首先第一个 request 是你问你叫你的同桌帮你把笔捡起来，那你和你同桌之间的关系其实是相对这个sorry， 我换另外一个例子吧。你对你的同桌说这个你们能把这个你手上那本书借给我？假设啊，然后呢，因为你跟你同桌可能在一起认识很久，所以你们 relative power， 你如果说你们关系很好的话，你们的 relative power 这个 distance 其实是相对比较近的。但与此同时，你相对比起你在图书馆见到一个人，或者是你在书店见到一个人，他买了一本新的书，然后你跟他说你把这个手上的书借给我，我想看。那你觉得你成功的可能性是多高呢？那如果说你要是说的同样的话，你假设你对你同桌说的话和你对这个 stranger 说的话是完全一样的话，那我觉得十有八九你是会 fail 的，就是你不会成功的借到这本书，所以你可能需要更多的这个语言，然后更充分的理由去借这本书。然后 对，然后就是这个的话，就联系到最后的我们叫这种就 relative imposition weight of imposition。那这样子的话，我们就可以分析到，就比如说还是同理啊，你对同桌说，你说你帮我捡一下笔，然后呢，同桌帮你捡下来，顺手就捡起来了。那这个你首先你们的 distance 是比较近的，然后你们之间的 power difference 其实相对是没有的，就是除非说你这个同桌是一个学生会长，然后呢，或者是他正好要管着你，然后呢，他可能不太愿意，或者你这个同桌是一个 buller，他是非常喜欢 bully 你的。然后呢，那如果是这样一个情况，他可能会帮你做。但是如果是假设你们俩的这个 relative power 是类似的话，而且这个你让他干的这个事情给他造成的这种困扰会比较少，那他就会帮你做。那与此同时，假如说你跑去问你的公司的同事说，你能不能把你的车借给我，我父母要过来。那我们就要考虑的东西很多。首先，你要借一个车，肯定要比让别人帮忙捡一支笔要的这个，对于对方来说的这个困扰啊，或者是它的 cost 会更高。但这个 cost 的话，指的是比如说 time effort，就是它可以是跟钱有关的，也可以是跟时间有关的，或者其他东西有关的，或者感受上的这个需求有关的。所以它这个相对的这个 cost 会比较高。与此同时，你跟同事的关系可能，因为我们讲通常在工作场所的话，除非你真的是很好的朋友，但是一般通常都不太会出现，就是在澳洲的话是不太会出现太过于 personal 的这种 interaction 的。然后呢，尽管你们之间的 power difference 是类似的，那你问他借，那他很有可能就不会借给你。所以你可能会需要一系列的这些一些技巧来去提高你的成功率。但是与此同时，你要讲到假设啊，是像这个我们举中国的例子啊，在中国的话，就是假如说是这个你的直属上司跟你说，哎，我家里人来了，我想问你借一下车。那有些时候要看情况，可能这个人他就会同意了，因为为什么？你们之间会有一个 power difference，然后你可能想 impress your boss。
OK，了解。
对，然后还会考虑到一些，就比如说是它的culture 的一些 convention，就是不同的这个 culture 之间，它可能是有一些 culture 的话，就像日本、韩国、中国其实都是这样子，就是说在职场上，然后boss 就是你的 supervisor boss 作为相对比起这个其他的这些员工来说，他的这个 power difference 会相对比较大。所以我前阵子就前天我有交一个 assignment，然后里面就讲到分析说，一个美国人，然后呢，他和他的直属上司一个日本人，然后他们是在一个日本的公司，然后在讨论这个一个一个叫 ad 的一个问题，就是那个广告的一个问题。然后呢，这个美国人他就会 assume 说，那我们既然要开这个会，你就是想听我的真实的意见。但是其实那个日本人当时后来是对他的这个下属的行为和举动很不满意，原因是因为他下属当时在开会的时候就是提出了很多意见，然后反驳了这个 boss 说的意见一些东西，然后他就会不满意。原因是什么呢？就是因为在一个conventionally speaking，就 generally speaking，在这种日本的一个这个公司的环境下，让这个上司给他的下属开一个这样的会，其实是他会 assume 就说这个上司是要告诉这个下属要怎么去做，而不是让下属去这个提意见。你知道什么意思吧？就是他们对于这个meeting 的这个 purpose，其实会有一些misunderstanding，或者是有不同的 interpretation，所以就导致一系列这个会议的过程都非常的不顺利。
明白了。我这会儿大家都看大家还有没有其他的那个